10 seconds. The floor director's voice is sharp brass in my earpiece, slicing through the sterile quiet of the studio. The ambient air hangs at a regulated 64 degrees, yet a fine sheen of sweat coats the nape of my neck. My hands rest perfectly still on the lucite desk, but out of frame, shielded by the opaque modesty panel, my right hand grips my left knee. My fingernails dig through the wool fabric of my trousers, pressing hard enough to leave crescent moon bruises in the flesh. Being seen is the one variable I engineered my entire existence to avoid. 5 seconds. The floor manager raises a hand, his fingers unfolding one by one. The red light on camera 1 blooms like a sudden bright wound. My name is Sophia Brown, and I am 34 years old. For my entire life, my family treated my intellect as a useful tool and my face as a tragic liability. My younger sister told me I was too ugly to be on television, demanding I use my behind-the-scenes network connections to hand her the anchor chair. But when she turned on the morning broadcast 3 months later, she did not see her own reflection. She saw the sister she tried to keep in the shadows, broadcasting her ultimate downfall live to the entire state of Georgia. Before I share how I dismantled her fragile glass house, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to Orange Revenge if you have ever had to outsmart people who severely underestimated your worth. 3 months earlier. The damp heat of a Georgia Sunday wrapped around the back patio of my parents' Buckhead estate. The air smelled of heavy magnolia blossoms, expensive catering, and the faint metallic tang of impending rain. I stood near the edge of the travertine terrace, hovering by a sweating silver urn of iced sweet tea, performing my designated family function. I was the invisible perimeter guard. A jazz trio played a muted set somewhere near the imported hydrangeas. Waiters navigated a sea of pastel sundresses and seersucker suits, balancing trays of shrimp and grits on porcelain-tasting spoons. My mother Evelyn glided through the crowd. She was a practiced hostess, effortlessly steering a local state senator toward the outdoor bar. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, offered a tight, obligatory nod, and swept past. A moment later, she introduced me to a passing real estate developer with a careless flick of her wrist. "This is Sophia, Harper's older sister, the one who works in TV behind the scenes." The developer offered a polite, vacant smile, his gaze already shifting past my shoulder, and excused himself toward the carving station. I did not mind the dismissal. In fact, I relied on it. The shadows were where I functioned best. I was a senior broadcast producer for a major national network. I spent my days feeding vital statistics, adjusting key lighting, and whispering crisis management lines into the ears of people who stood in the spotlight. My invisibility was not a genetic accident. It was a carefully learned survival trait. I learned very early that the spotlight in the Brown household operated as a zero-sum game, and the required currency was always aesthetic. I took a slow sip of my tea, the ice cracking softly against the glass. I thought of a silver trophy gathering dust on a shelf in my childhood bedroom. It was a state debate championship I won at 16. I rode the charter bus back to Atlanta holding it alone because my parents were busy attending my younger sister's regional pageant callbacks. I remembered a framed family portrait taken when I was 8, hanging prominently in the estate main hallway. The photographer had composed the shot so tightly around Harper's bright, toothy smile and my parents' beaming faces that my own shoulder and half my head were cropped out of the final print. They framed it anyway. It still hangs there, a silent testament to the hierarchy. I realized then that my mind was useful, but my face was a distraction to their perfect narrative. So I took my sharp analytical brain and hit it. Competence became my armor. Unseen, I was untouchable. Across the manicured lawn, my brother-in-law Preston held court near the edge of the infinity pool. Preston was a slick, fast-talking talent agent whose business acumen always seemed to hover just on the wrong side of desperate. He wore a linen suit that read more Miami nightclub than Atlanta high society, swirling a bourbon and pitching an unseen television concept to a captive audience of my father country club associates. As I walked past the pool to grab a fresh napkin, I overheard Preston stepping away from his group, pressing his phone tight to his ear. "The equity is covered." Preston hissed into the receiver, his voice tight with hidden panic. "Just relax. The infusion is coming next month." I filed the strange snippet of conversation away in my mind. It meant nothing to me at the time, just another one of Preston's shaky financial promises. A shift in the ambient noise pulled my attention back to the caterers. A laugh cut sharply across the lawn. It was high, bright, and meticulously calibrated to draw every eye within a 50-foot radius. It belonged to Harper. The sticky Georgia heat was suddenly replaced by a familiar chill settling deep in my chest. Harper stood surrounded by a semicircle of admirers. She was 31, a lifestyle influencer whose subscriber count had been quietly flatlining for 18 months. Yet she commanded the space with the fierce entitlement of someone who had never heard the word no. The moment her eyes locked onto me standing by the beverage station, her performative, breezy charm vanished. She navigated the crowd, her heels clicking a steady, ominous rhythm against the travertine tiles. Evelyn detached herself from the state senator and fell into step beside her younger daughter, flanking her like a dedicated bodyguard. They moved in perfect tandem, closing the distance between the center of attention and the shadows where I stood. Harper cornered me against the brick pillar holding the sweet tea urn. She did not offer a greeting. Meridian Broadcasting is launching Atlanta Daybreak next quarter, Harper stated, crossing her arms over her designer silk blouse. Preston heard they are quietly casting the lead anchor chair. I need you to bypass the standard casting directors and put my reel directly on the desk of the network president. I looked at her, maintaining an even, unblinking expression. Atlanta Daybreak is a hard-hitting investigative journalism program. Harper, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly measured. The network is hunting for sharp analytical talent capable of breaking down complex regional economic shifts on live television. They are not casting cosmetic lifestyle influencers. Evelyn gasped, stepping forward to shield her golden child. "Sophia, do not be so hostile," my mother scolded, her voice laced with manufactured disappointment. "Your sister has a large online following. She understands how to connect with an audience. You are just being difficult because you resent her success." Harper waved our mother off, stepping directly into my personal space. The scent of her heavy floral perfume masked the natural smell of the magnolias. She looked me up and down, her eyes traveling from my sensible flats to my practical, unstyled hair. The disdain in her gaze was palpable. "Face it, Sophia." Harper sneered, her voice dropping to a toxic whisper meant only for me. "You are the brains, but you are too ugly for TV. I am the pretty one. Just make the call and stay in the background where you belong." The words struck me, but not with a sudden shock. They hit with the dull, familiar ache of an old wound reopening. She thought she was delivering a cruel insult. She did not realize she was simply reinforcing the lie I had silently believed since childhood. The lie that my appearance disqualified me from being seen, chosen, or loved. The lie that hiding was my only safe harbor. I did not scream. I did not throw my iced tea in her face. The cold, familiar shame washed over me, cementing my desire to simply be left alone. It was always easier to surrender than to engage in a battle I was conditioned to lose. "Fine," I said, softly setting my glass down on the linen-draped table. "Send Preston office the portfolio. I will submit it tomorrow." Harper smiled a hollow, victorious expression and turned back toward the party, her heels clicking a triumphant retreat. That evening, I sat in the passenger seat of our car while my husband Marcus drove us back to our Midtown condo. Marcus is a media rights attorney who untangles complex corporate liabilities for a living. He possesses a brilliant analytical mind and a fierce protective streak. I stared out the window at the passing city lights and quietly repeated Harper words to him. I admitted with a heavy heart that the insult still landed. I confessed that some broken part of me still believed she was right. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me I was beautiful. He gave me the exact strategic anchor I needed. Then let them keep believing it. Marcus set his voice a steady, comforting rumble in the dark car. "Let them think you are hiding. The quiet ones always see the board the clearest. The damp heat of a Georgia Sunday wrapped around the back patio of my parents' Buckhead estate. The air smelled of heavy magnolia blossoms, catering trays, and the faint metallic tang of impending rain. I stood near the edge of the travertine terrace, hovering by a sweating silver urn of iced sweet tea, performing my designated family function. I was the invisible perimeter guard. A jazz trio played a muted set somewhere near the imported hydrangeas. Waiters navigated a sea of pastel sundresses and seersucker suits balancing porcelain tasting spoons. My mother, Evelyn, glided through the crowd. She was a practiced hostess, steering a local state senator toward the outdoor bar. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, offered a tight, obligatory nod, and swept past. Across the manicured lawn, my younger sister Harper held court near the edge of the infinity pool. Harper was 31, a lifestyle influencer, whose subscriber count had been quietly flatlining for 18 months. Yet she commanded the space with the fierce entitlement of someone who had never heard the word no. I watched her direct her husband Preston to take a dozen candid photos of her holding a branded seltzer she had no intention of drinking. Preston was a slick, fast-talking talent agent. He wore a linen suit that read more Miami nightclub than Atlanta high society. He snapped the photos dutifully, but his smile looked strained. I stepped away from the beverage station to find a quiet place in the shade. The relentless performance of Southern hospitality always drained my energy. I walked toward the caterer's tent, positioned behind a thick row of tall boxwood hedges. Before I rounded the corner, I heard a voice. It was low, frantic, and tight with hidden panic. I paused, keeping my footsteps silent on the soft grass. Preston stood hidden from the main party, holding his phone tight against his ear. He paced a short, tight circle, grass stains marking the edges of his expensive leather shoes. "I told you the equity is handled," Preston hissed into the receiver. "Just relax. The draw is processing next month. I have it under control. Do not call this number again." He pulled the phone away from his face, ending the call with a sharp jab of his thumb. He stood there for a long moment, wiping a thick bead of sweat from his forehead. He took a deep breath, plastered his fake, charismatic smile back onto his face, and stepped out from behind the hedges to rejoin the wealthy crowd. I filed that specific snippet of conversation away in my mind. A talent agent sweating over equity and secret phone calls was a glaring anomaly. It was a loose thread pulling at the seams of their perfect facade. I returned to the sweet tea urn, picking up my glass. The ice cracked softly against the rim. Before I could take a sip, the temperature on the terrace seemed to drop. The sticky heat was replaced by a sharp, familiar chill, settling deep in my chest. Harper had finished her photo session. She navigated the crowd, her heels clicking a steady, ominous rhythm against the travertine tiles. Evelyn detached herself from the state senator and fell into step beside her younger daughter, flanking her like a dedicated bodyguard. They moved in perfect tandem, closing the distance between the center of attention and the shadows where I stood. Harper cornered me against the brick pillar. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how my week had been. "Meridian Broadcasting is launching Atlanta Daybreak next quarter," Harper stated, crossing her arms over her designer silk blouse. Preston heard they are quietly casting the lead anchor chair. "I need you to bypass the standard casting directors and put my reel directly on the desk of the network president." I looked at her, maintaining an even unblinking expression. "I am a senior broadcast producer, Harper," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "I know the exact parameters of that project. Atlanta Daybreak is a hard-hitting investigative journalism program. The network is hunting for sharp, analytical talent capable of breaking down complex regional economic shifts on live television. They are not casting cosmetic lifestyle influencers." Evelyn gasped, stepping forward to shield her golden child. "Sophia, do not be so hostile," my mother scolded, her voice laced with manufactured disappointment. "Your sister has a large online following. She understands how to connect with an audience. You are just being difficult because you resent her success." Harper waved our mother off, stepping directly into my personal space. The scent of her heavy floral perfume masked the natural smell of the magnolias. She looked me up and down, her eyes traveling from my sensible flats to my practical, unstyled hair. The disdain in her gaze was palpable. "Face it," Sophia Harper sneered. Her voice, dropping to a toxic whisper, meant only for me. "You are the brains, But you are too ugly for TV. I am the pretty one. Make the call and stay in the background where you belong." The words struck me, but not with a sudden shock. They hit with the dull, familiar ache of an old wound reopening. Harper thought she was delivering a cruel insult. She thought she was stating an objective fact about our dynamic. She did not realize she was simply reinforcing the core lie I had silently believed since childhood. The lie that my appearance disqualified me from being seen chosen or loved. The lie that my intellect was a useful tool, but my physical presence was an unforgivable flaw. I had organized my entire adult life around that shame, finding safety in the dark control rooms where cameras could not reach me. I did not fire back. I did not throw my iced tea in her face. I stood perfectly still, absorbing the blow. The cold, familiar shame washed over me, cementing my desire to simply be left alone. It was always easier to surrender than to engage in a battle I felt unequipped to win. "Fine," I said softly, setting my glass down on the linen-draped table. "Send Preston Office the portfolio. I will submit it tomorrow." Harper smiled a hollow, victorious expression and turned back toward the party, her heels clicking a triumphant retreat. She had won the interaction, securing the favor she demanded. She walked away, oblivious to the fact that her boundless arrogance would soon become the exact shovel she needed to dig her own grave. That evening, I sat in the passenger seat of our sedan while my husband Marcus drove us back to our Midtown condo. The tires hummed a steady rhythm on the interstate. Marcus is a media rights attorney, a man who navigates high-stakes corporate liabilities with chilling precision. He possesses a brilliant analytical mind and a fierce protective streak. He noticed my quiet demeanor, the heavy silence filling the space between us. I stared out the window at the passing city lights and quietly recited Harper words to him. I admitted with a heavy heart that the insult still landed. I confessed the darkest part of my own psychology. I told my husband that some broken part of me still believed she was right. I told him I belonged in the background. Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his grip tightening slightly on the leather steering wheel. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me I was beautiful to soothe my bruised ego. He treated my vulnerability with profound respect, recognizing the strategic battlefield my family had constructed. He offered a tactical advantage. Then let them keep believing it. Marcus set his voice a calm, stabilizing rumble in the dark car. The quiet ones always see the board the clearest. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, processing his words. He was right. My invisibility was my greatest asset. My family demanded I stay in the shadows, never realizing that the shadows provide the perfect vantage point to watch an empire crumble. The trap was not yet set, but the foundation was poured. Harper would get her audition. She would step into the glaring, unforgiving light of a professional television studio, and I would simply stand in the dark control room, watching her face the reality of her own profound limitations. 3 weeks passed. The downtown Atlanta headquarters of Meridian Broadcasting operated at a chilling 62 degrees. The control room sat suspended like a dark glass command center above the primary studio floor. Wall-to-wall monitors displayed every angle, every lighting cue, and every microscopic flaw of whoever dared to sit at the anchor desk. I thrived in this frozen, windowless cave. This was my domain. Meridian possessed a distinct, ruthless reputation in the industry. For top-tier anchor slots, the network executives utilized a brutal initiation rite. They called it the blackout. Halfway through a live screen test, the teleprompter feed would deliberately die. The script would vanish, leaving the candidate staring at a blank glass screen. It separated the journalists from the teleprompter readers. If you could not pivot, synthesize breaking information, and hold an audience using nothing but your own intellect, you had no business steering a flagship morning show. I knew the blackout was coming. I simply watched the monitors and waited. Harper arrived 45 minutes late. She swept onto the studio floor wearing a plunging emerald silk gown, better suited for a red carpet gala than a serious morning news broadcast. She brought a chaotic, frantic energy into the pristine workspace. Within 10 seconds, she snapped her fingers at a junior production assistant, demanding a specific brand of imported sparkling water. When the audio technician attempted to clip a lavalier microphone to her lapel, She batted his hand away, complaining the wire ruined the silhouette of her dress. She treated the crew like indentured servants, expecting everyone to bow to her manufactured celebrity status. From my seat in the darkened control room, I watched her preen and pose for the camera lenses. I kept my face blank, adjusting the audio levels on the mixing board. I had pulled the strings to secure her this specific time slot, fulfilling my promise from the patio. My obligation was fulfilled. The rest was entirely up to her. The floor director signaled the countdown. Harper flashed a bright, rehearsed smile. The red tally light illuminated. She began reading the introductory copy rolling across the teleprompter. For the first 60 seconds, she performed adequately. Her voice held a practiced, hollow cadence, delivering local traffic updates and a light human interest story. She relied heavily on her cosmetic appeal, tilting her chin to catch the key light. Then the director hit the kill switch. The scrolling text on the prompter froze and faded to black. The blackout had arrived. Harper stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her artificial smile faltered. She blinked rapidly, staring at the dark glass lens. A seasoned journalist would have transitioned seamlessly into an improvised sign-off or tossed the segment to a commercial break. Harper did neither. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. Then she broke. She slammed her hand down on the lucite desk. "What is going on?" Harper shrieked, her voice echoing harshly through the studio monitors. "The screen is dead. Fix it. Fix it right now." She did not attempt to maintain her composure. She glared at the floor director, throwing her hands up in a furious tantrum. "You people are incompetent. Do you know who I am? Get someone out here to fix this stupid machine before I call my agent." The control room winced. The executive producer sighed, rubbing his temples in sheer exhaustion. I did what my job required. I leaned into the talkback microphone, keeping my tone crisp and dry. I fed the executive producer a stream of historical data and clean transitional lines, attempting to salvage the ruined segment. I rattled off recent shifts in the Atlanta housing market zoning regulations and property tax codes, offering a life raft of content to feed the anchor. I did not realize someone else had entered the dark control room. Vance Okafor stood right behind my chair. As the network president, Okafor was a legendary media predator. He built empires on intuition and gutted failing programs with zero hesitation. He listened to the steady, rapid-fire intellect pouring from my microphone. He watched the monitors displaying the screeching, unprepared influencer on the studio floor. He had heard enough. Okafor leaned over the console and hit the primary kill switch. Cut her feed. Okafor ordered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Get her off my set. He turned his sharp, calculating gaze directly onto me. You, the producer, go down there. I froze. My hands hovered over the mixing board. Excuse me? I asked, keeping my voice low. Okafor pointed a rigid finger toward the soundproof glass overlooking the studio floor. You have the data. You have the cadence. Get in the chair. Let us see if you can hold the room. This was the catalyst. It was not a gift handed to me. It was a terrifying, impossible choice. Every ingrained instinct screamed at me to refuse. The camera was the one place my childhood conditioning told me I was forbidden to exist. Stepping into the glaring studio lights meant discarding the armor I had spent over a decade building. It meant risking the cold, familiar safety of the shadows. I hesitated, staring at the heavy steel door leading down to the studio. I felt the phantom weight of the cropped family photo. I felt Harper, cruel whisper from the sweet tea station echoing in my ears, telling me to stay in the background. I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal pantsuit. I did not look back at Okafor. I walked out of the control room and descended the metal staircase. The studio floor was chaotic. A production assistant was ushering a furious, complaining Harper toward the wings. I ignored her. I walked straight to the anchor desk and sat down. The leather chair felt firm and unfamiliar. The floor director looked confused, but he caught the signal from the control room. He pointed a finger at me and counted down from 3. The red light bloomed. I did not have a teleprompter. I did not have a script. I looked directly into the dead glass eye of the camera, and I spoke. I delivered a flawless 10-minute investigative monologue. I detailed the profound structural shifts in the Georgia economic infrastructure, mapping out the intersection of urban development and rural industrial decline. I cited specific job growth metrics tied to the Savannah port expansion and contrasted them with the rising cost of living in the Piedmont Plateau. My voice was steady, authoritative, and sharp. I did not rely on a cosmetic smile. I commanded the space using nothing but my own cultivated intellect. When I finished my closing statement and signed off, the studio descended into a heavy silence. Nobody moved. The cameraman stared at me. The floor director stood perfectly still. Through the soundproof glass, I saw the entire control room watching me with undivided attention. I unclipped the lavalier microphone from my lapel and stood up from the desk. My legs felt slightly unsteady, but a new strange electricity pulsed through my veins. I walked off the set, heading toward the exit. Harper stood in the shadows of the wings, her arms crossed tightly over her emerald gown. Her jaw hung slightly open. She looked at me, searching for an explanation for what she had just witnessed. They just needed a body to reset the room, I told her, keeping my tone gentle and dismissive. It is a standard technical protocol. The tension drained from Harper's shoulders. She let out a long, dramatic sigh of relief, eagerly accepting the convenient fiction. "Right," she muttered, waving a hand. "Of course. For a second I thought they actually wanted you to read the news. Can you imagine?" She laughed, a hollow, dismissive sound. I let her embrace the delusion. I invited her to believe the decoy, ensuring she remained entirely oblivious to the shifting reality around her. I walked past her, stepping back into the cool, dim corridor leading to the executive offices. I expected to return to my production desk and fade back into the background, but Vance Okafor blocked the hallway. The network president stood with his hands tucked into his pockets, studying me with a terrifyingly clear intensity. He did not offer me a contract. He did not tell me I was hired. He asked a single question that struck the very foundation of my existence. "Why have you been hiding?" The question hung in the chilled air. It pierced through 11 years of meticulous invisibility. It detonated the lie my family had fed me. Okafor did not see a producer who belonged in the dark. He saw a weapon ready to be deployed. Vance Okafor did not offer miracles overnight. He operated with the relentless patience of a predator circling a specific target. For 10 days following the studio blackout, he appeared in my peripheral vision. He sat in the spare chair of my editing bay while I spliced together footage for the evening broadcast. He left confidential ratings reports on my keyboard, highlighting the stark decline in viewership under the previous morning anchor. He wanted me in the chair, and he made sure I understood the exact numerical value of the seat. I resisted his offers with genuine apprehension. The anchor desk was not a simple promotion. It was a permanent statewide exposure. Stepping in front of the lens meant surrendering the invisibility that had kept me safe. I sat across from Marcus at our kitchen island late one evening, a drafted contract resting between us on the granite counter. The numbers printed on the heavy bond paper represented generational wealth, a multi-year commitment to be the sole face of Meridian Broadcasting. But looking at the signature line, I felt the phantom sting of my childhood. I told Marcus about the framing of our family photographs, how my parents always positioned Harper dead center, bathed in prime lighting, while I was pushed to the blurry, unfocused edges. I spent 34 years internalizing the idea that my physical form was a profound detriment. I compensated by mastering the control room. I made a career out of smoothing the flaws of other broadcasters, feeding them intelligence they lacked, and manufacturing their charisma from the shadows. I built immense network capital because influence was the only currency I could accumulate in the dark. My power was not a stroke of luck. It was armor forged to protect the wound my sister tore open at the sweet tea station. Taking the job meant stripping off the armor. Marcus picked up a silver pen and rolled it between his fingers. He did not push me to sign. He understood the deep psychological architecture of my hesitation. He simply pointed out that remaining hidden was a choice I made when I was 8 years old, dictated by people who feared my potential. He asked if I intended to let a childhood fiction dictate the rest of my professional trajectory. I stared at the blank signature line. The safety of the control room suddenly felt like a cage I had locked from the inside. I picked up the pen. The ink flowed smooth and dark across the paper. I signed the contract. I claimed the lead anchor chair. The woman who hid in the background ceased to exist. There was a logistical hurdle to clear. A top-tier network cannot hide a lead anchor for 3 months without the press uncovering the transition. Leaks are the lifeblood of the television industry. I refused to let my debut become a chaotic tabloid rumor. As a senior broadcast producer, I held unilateral control over the promotional rollout. I walked into Okafor corner office the next morning and pitched a strategy that would turn the secrecy into a revenue-generating spectacle. I proposed a blackout campaign. Meridian would market the relaunch of Atlanta Daybreak around a mystery anchor. We would release no names, no press photos, and no leaked audition tapes. The marketing hook would rely entirely on anticipation. I drafted a rollout featuring stark backlit silhouettes of a woman sitting at an anchor desk. The tagline would simply read, "Guess who is waking up Atlanta?" Okafor loved the pitch. It generated instant citywide curiosity while providing the perfect operational decoy. I continued running the production floor during the day, maintaining my usual demanding schedule while secretly rehearsing on a closed set at midnight. I spent those late hours refining my delivery, mastering the teleprompter pace, and learning how to hold the lens without flinching. I stared into the dark glass of the camera and practiced existing without flinching. The entire city became complicit in my disguise. The execution moved swiftly. 6 weeks before the scheduled premiere, the marketing department launched the outdoor campaign. I stood on the balcony of our Midtown condo watching the traffic flow along the downtown connector. A newly installed digital billboard towered over the interstate. The screen displayed a crisp, high-definition silhouette of my profile, sharp and commanding against a crimson background. The bold white text challenged the morning commuters to guess the identity of the new broadcast lead. My phone vibrated against the balcony railing. It was a text from Marcus sending me a screenshot of a social media post. Harper had uploaded a video of herself driving directly beneath that exact billboard. In the footage, she pointed her manicured finger at the glowing silhouette of my face. She squealed into the camera, telling her dwindling followers that network secrecy was thrilling, and she could not wait to share her big secret. She turned to her husband in the passenger seat and loudly claimed the silhouette was modeled after her own jawline. The dramatic irony snapped shut like a steel trap. She was driving under a monument to my success, entirely convinced it belonged to her. The delusion had taken root, and the harvest would be devastating. The mahogany dining table at my parents' Buckhead estate became the stage for an elaborate ongoing fiction. Every Sunday evening, my family gathered for dinner, and every Sunday, the shared delusion expanded further. Harper sat at the opposite end of the table, radiating a frantic, manufactured energy. She wore a tailored ivory jumpsuit that still bore the faint crease of a fresh retail purchase. Her lips looked slightly swollen, a clear indication of recent cosmetic enhancements she intended to showcase on high-definition television. Preston sat beside her, pouring a heavy measure of my Father Reserve wine. He operated as the chief architect of her fantasy. To keep Harper spending and to keep his own failing talent agency relevant, Preston spun a masterful web of deceit. He leaned across the table, assuring my parents that the network executives were simply finalizing the legal parameters of her lucrative contract. He claimed the casting directors were blown away by her raw emotional vulnerability during the blackout test. According to Preston, the network wanted a relatable, genuine face to wake up the city, not another rigid newsreader. Harper devoured the praise. She picked up her crystal glass, waving it in my direction with a patronizing tilt of her head. "You must be so exhausted, Sophia," she purred, her voice laced with mock sympathy. "Running cables and managing spreadsheets all day behind the scenes. I just do not know how you handle the boredom. But do not worry, once my contract goes public, I will make sure they give you a nice producer credit on my segments. I might even let you pick my wardrobe for the Friday broadcasts. I sat quietly, slicing a piece of roasted lamb. I did not engage in the petty squabble. I offered a polite, neutral smile and took a slow bite of my dinner. Evelyn beamed at her younger daughter, already planning country club viewing parties, while Richard nodded in patriarchal approval. They lived inside a shimmering bubble of anticipation, eager to reap the social rewards of her impending stardom. But the silence I maintained was not born of cold triumph. Beneath the quiet exterior, a deep, unsettling dread began to take root. I spent my days analyzing data, verifying sources, and untangling complex narratives. I applied those same journalistic instincts to my sister's sudden surge in lifestyle expenditures. Through my established network connections, I confirmed the specific boutique public relations firm she recently hired. They required a $50,000 upfront retainer just to draft a preliminary press release. I utilized public dealership registries to trace the sudden appearance of 2 brand-new luxury sport utility vehicles parked in Preston driveway. Both were leased under his struggling talent agency using highly leveraged financing. Harper was booking weekly appointments at a premier medical spa, charging exorbitant fees to a credit line that could not sustain the balance. The math refused to align. Preston Talent Agency was a sinking ship, producing zero viable revenue. Harper possessed no actual income. They were stacking an unpayable mountain of debt against a television contract that did not exist. I sat in my Midtown condo reviewing the fragmented financial data I had managed to gather, and a cold knot tightened in my gut. I felt no joy in their foolishness. If Preston and Harper defaulted on these staggering liabilities, the creditors would inevitably look for a safety net. That safety net was Richard and Evelyn. My parents would eventually bear the crushing weight of this reckless spending. While my sister built a prison of debt, I spent my midnight hours shedding a lifelong cage. The transition from the control room to the anchor desk required grueling covert preparation. At 2 a.m, long after the daytime staff vacated the Meridian Broadcasting headquarters, I sat under the glaring studio lights. The air conditioning hummed its steady mechanical tune. The red tally light on the primary camera glowed, serving as a silent, impartial witness. For the first few nights, panic tightened my throat. I felt the familiar urge to shrink to hide my features behind a clipboard or a headset. I felt the ghost of that cropped family photograph mocking my audacity. But as I read the copy, as I broke down complex legislative policies and municipal tax codes, the fear began to dissipate. The rhythm of the broadcast took over. The network executives organized blind test broadcasts presenting my recorded segments to demographically varied focus groups across the state. They sought unbiased, unvarnished feedback. My executive producer slid the preliminary data folders across the desk during a private morning briefing. I opened the file expecting harsh critiques about my appearance or my austere delivery. Instead, the data revealed something profound. The viewers did not dissect my jawline or critique my wardrobe. The focus groups used words like commanding trustworthy and fiercely intelligent. They noted my ability to synthesize dense information without patronizing the audience. They responded to the woman delivering the truth, not the aesthetic shell presenting it. I stared at the pages, the printed metrics challenging the deepest insecurities I harbored. The lie I had carried since I was 8 years old, the belief that my face disqualified me from being valued, began to fracture. The lens was not a weapon designed to expose my flaws. It was a tool that amplified my competence. Stepping into the light was terrifying, but it was also actively healing the oldest wound I carried. I was being seen, and more importantly, I was being chosen for the exact mind my family had always told me to hide. During the daylight hours, I maintained my flawless decoy. I paced the production floor, holding a clipboard, directing camera crews, and barking orders into my headset. I played the overworked producer, shielding my impending debut behind the network mystery anchor marketing campaign. My colleagues remained oblivious. My parents remained blissfully ignorant. Half the city wondered who would take the seat while I quietly prepared to claim it. The duality of my existence required intense compartmentalization. I navigated the tension by leaning heavily on Marcus. He remained my steadfast anchor, offering sharp legal insights and quiet solidarity. But the impending collision of my 2 worlds was accelerating faster than either of us anticipated. I returned to our Midtown condo late one Thursday night, my muscles aching from a marathon rehearsal session. The living room was dark, save for the harsh blue light spilling from Marcus' laptop screen. He sat at the granite kitchen island, his glasses reflecting the glowing data. He did not look up when I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. He was deeply immersed in untangling a web of regional property liens, a routine task for his corporate liability acquisitions. But his posture was unusually rigid. The relaxed confidence he typically exuded was entirely absent. I walked into the kitchen, noting the heavy silence stretching between us. He pressed a key, saving a downloaded document to his encrypted local drive. He took off his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked up at me. His expression carried a grim, unmistakable warning. He turned the laptop screen just enough for me to see the bold legal heading of a scanned document. "Sophia," he said, his voice a low, cautious rumble in the quiet room. "It is your parents' house." I stared at the laptop screen, the harsh blue light reflecting off the granite countertop. The document displayed was a dense municipal property lien registered with the county clerk. My eyes scanned the legal phrasing, zeroing in on the specific parcel identification number. The digits matched the sprawling Buckhead estate, where I had endured 3 decades of polite marginalization. Marcus did not speak. He let the silent weight of the discovery settle over the kitchen. As a media rights attorney, Marcus spent his days dissecting complex corporate liabilities. He routinely scrubbed regional property databases, hunting for hidden encumbrances, before finalizing massive acquisitions for his clients. It was tedious, grueling work that required a mind capable of identifying a single misplaced comma in a 1,000-page contract. He possessed that mind. While executing a standard sweep for a completely unrelated commercial real estate deal, his algorithm flagged an anomaly, sharing a familiar surname. He pulled the thread. The thread unraveled into a catastrophic felony. "What exactly am I looking at, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice flat, masking the sudden spike in my pulse. "You are looking at a $500,000 secondary mortgage executed just 6 weeks ago," Marcus explained, his tone clinical and precise. He scrolled down the page to reveal the authorization block. "The primary signatory listed is your father, Richard Brown. The secondary guarantor is Preston Talent Agency. The funds were dispersed directly into a commercial holding account controlled entirely by your brother-in-law." I leaned closer, my forensic instincts overpowering my initial shock. I examined the digital reproduction of my father's signature. Richard possessed a sharp, distinctive script shaped by decades of signing checks for private schools and country club dues. The signature on the screen looked close, but the angles lacked his usual confident pressure. The tail of the R hesitated. The loop of the B was slightly compressed. "That is not my father's signature," I stated, pointing a finger at the screen. "Richard would never leverage the equity of that house to fund a failing talent agency. He considers debt a character flaw." Marcus nodded, pivoting the laptop back toward himself. "I know. That is why I pulled the notary records attached to the filing. Preston utilized a mobile notary service known for operating on the fringes of compliance. The notary stamped the document validating a forged signature. Preston orchestrated an illegal equity extraction." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. The sudden influx of leased luxury vehicles, the $50,000 public relations retainer, the endless cosmetic procedures Harper was booking. Preston and Harper were not just spending recklessly on credit cards. They were actively robbing my parents. Preston funneled $500,000 of stolen equity straight into his dying agency and used the liquidity to finance Harper's premature celebrity lifestyle. They constructed a massive, glittering house of cards funded entirely by felony bank fraud. They banked everything on a single desperate assumption. They believed Harper's non-existent television contract would eventually materialize. They planned to use her imaginary network salary to quietly pay back the forged mortgage before my father ever noticed the missing equity or received a default notice in the mail. They gambled my parents' financial security on a delusion I had actively encouraged. A sudden sharp rush of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. I grabbed the edge of the granite island, my knuckles turning white. "We need to buy the debt," I said, my mind racing toward a swift, ruthless retaliation. If we buy the debt package from the lender, we control the lien. We can foreclose on the property, evict them all, and burn Preston to the ground. Marcus stopped typing. He looked up at me over the rim of his glasses. The clinical lawyer vanished, replaced by a fierce, grounding anchor. He reached across the counter, placing his warm, steady hand over my tense grip. "We cannot buy the debt," Sophia Marcus said, his voice lowering into a calm, authoritative register. "From a legal standpoint, that strategy is entirely incoherent." He withdrew his hand and tapped the forged signature on the screen. "This mortgage is built on a forgery. That makes the lien legally voidable. Your parents are not the perpetrators here. They are the victims of a severe federal crime. If you attempt to purchase fraudulent debt and enforce a foreclosure against the victims, you become complicit in the extortion. You cannot foreclose on a fraud victim." I stepped back from the island, the legal reality functioning like cold water thrown in my face. The true exposure here is criminal. Marcus continued outlining the battlefield. Preston committed wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. The danger is not the bank seizing the house today. The danger is the absolute ruin that follows when this fraud inevitably surfaces. If Preston defaults, the bank launches an investigation. When they uncover the forgery, your parents will be dragged into a massive federal inquiry. They will endure public humiliation, frozen assets, and grueling depositions to prove they did not authorize the loan. The conflict morphed from a petty vanity dispute into a life-altering crisis. My choice was no longer about teaching my sister a lesson in humility. The choice was what to do with the knowledge that could simultaneously destroy Harper and rescue the parents who had spent 34 years ignoring me. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the condo. The moral fork in the road presented itself sharp and unforgiving. The wounded part of my psychology, the 8-year-old girl cropped out of the family portrait, wanted to let the fire burn. My parents chose Harper face over my intellect every single day of my life. They funded her arrogance while demanding my invisibility. A dark, insidious voice whispered in my mind, urging me to walk away. Let the pretty one shatter her own glass house. Let Richard and Evelyn face the consequences of enabling a narcissist. Let them lose the Buckhead estate because they refused to see the monster sitting at their own dining table. I stood perfectly still, wrestling with the ugly, satisfying urge to inflict pain. But as I sat with that darkness, I recognized it for what it truly was. It was the beginning of becoming Harper. It was the exact same toxic cruelty that fueled her insult at the sweet tea station. If I allowed my parents to be defrauded out of spite, I validated the lie that my value was defined by vengeance rather than competence. I refused to let my trauma dictate my morality. I will not warn them yet. I decided, speaking aloud, to break the silence. Marcus raised an eyebrow, questioning the strategy. If you want to protect them, why delay? Because warning my parents right now tips our hand to Preston. I explained, my strategic mind taking the lead. If Richard confronts him, Preston will panic. He will shred the digital communications, hide the remaining cash, and vanish into the wind. He will leave my parents holding a $500,000 legal nightmare without the evidence required to prove the forgery. We need the paper trail intact. Marcus offered a slow, approving nod. He understood the necessity of securing the perimeter before triggering the alarm. We work in the shadows. Then Marcus confirmed reopening his encrypted drive. I will quietly preserve the routing numbers, the notary logs, and the transaction receipts. We build the dossier without crossing any legal boundaries. We secure the proof, so when the explosion happens, your parents have an airtight defense. We spent the next 4 hours downloading the municipal filings, mapping the cash flow, and locking the evidence behind military-grade encryption. We operated with the synchronized efficiency of a crisis management team. We built a protective net under my parents' estate, entirely without their knowledge or their gratitude. When Marcus finally closed the laptop, I walked away from the kitchen and entered my home office. The room was dark, illuminated only by the ambient streetlights filtering through the blinds. I stood in front of the large glass window looking at my reflection superimposed over the distant Atlanta skyline. I studied the lines of my face, the sharp angles my family had deemed unsuitable for the spotlight. I held the power to destroy my sister and the evidence to save my parents. I was no longer the invisible producer fetching coffee in the background. I was the architect of their impending reality. But staring into the dark glass, I could not tell yet which sister I was about to become. The woman who sought justice or the woman who demanded revenge. The countdown to the Atlanta Daybreak premiere ticked down to 14 days. The promotional billboards featuring my backlit silhouette dominated the skyline over the interstate. The marketing campaign fueled a citywide anticipation, but inside the walls of my parents' Buckhead estate, it fueled a quiet, frantic unraveling. During our Sunday family dinners, Harper's manic energy shifted into a brittle, vibrating panic. She had received no wardrobe schedule, no call sheet, and no studio pass. She picked at her catered meals, her smile strained, and her eyes darting nervously toward her phone. Preston smoothed over her frayed nerves with practiced charm, pouring her expensive wine and spinning endless tales of network secrecy. He insisted the executives were keeping her isolated to prevent leaks protecting her star power. He played the supportive husband perfectly, keeping her pacified while he scrambled behind the scenes to manage the looming fallout of his $500,000 fraud. But the illusion fractured on a Tuesday afternoon. Harper visited the Meridian Broadcasting lobby, attempting to charm her way upstairs to check on the status of her supposed contract. She cornered a young, overworked production intern near the security desk. Flustered and eager to escape her demanding presence, the intern made a fatal conversational stumble. He mentioned that nobody went near the Daybreak set without my direct clearance, stating that I was running the entire operational hierarchy of the new morning broadcast. Harper did not hear a testament to my hard-earned authority. Her narcissistic mind twisted the information through a lens of pure venom. She concluded I was using my producer status to actively block her contract deliberately, icing her out of the anchor chair out of ugly, bitter jealousy. She decided to strike first. She assumed I was still the defenseless, invisible sister who would cower and retreat at the first sign of public conflict. She crafted a fabricated story claiming I was embezzling production funds from the network budget to finance a lavish personal lifestyle. She packaged the lies and prepared to forward them to a rival Atlanta news blog known for prioritizing sensationalism over rigorous fact-checking. Preston was a fraudster, but he was not an amateur. When Harper proposed the smear campaign, he recognized the severe danger of a libel lawsuit. He coached her on digital anonymity, instructing her to draft the allegations on a disposable device and transmit them from a public network far away from their home or his office. He laid out a clean, untraceable strategy designed to inflict maximum damage with zero blowback. But Harper lacked the discipline for stealth. Driven by impulsive rage, she ignored his instructions. She created a burner email address, but she logged into it using her personal tablet while connected directly to the secure wireless network at Preston Talent Agency. Her sloppy impatience left a digital signature as clear as a fingerprint left at a crime scene. Meridian Broadcasting employs a dedicated crisis management team to monitor online chatter before any major launch. They intercepted the defamatory email pitch within hours. The lead cybersecurity analyst brought the encrypted file to my office. He bypassed the burner address in seconds, extracting the metadata and mapping the packet routing. He handed me a printed report showing the exact Internet Protocol address of the sender. It belonged to the agency Preston owned. The device signature matched an upscale tablet brand Harper habitually flaunted on her social media channels. I sat at my desk staring at the printed routing data. The previous iterations of my imagination expected this moment to bring a rush of victorious adrenaline. I expected to feel the cold, sharp satisfaction of catching my enemy in a trap. I felt none of those things. A heavy, profound grief settled in my chest, hollowing out my lungs. My little sister had just tried to burn down the career I had only just found the courage to claim. She wanted to destroy my livelihood, my reputation, and my freedom simply because she believed I dared to stand in her way. I looked at the archived proof resting on my desk. I understood the power I held. I could forward this metadata to the network legal department and watch them crush her with a defamation lawsuit that would leave her bankrupt. A dark, familiar voice whispered in my mind, urging me to wield that power, telling me that striking back was the only way to prove my strength. But I recognized that voice. It was the same lie that told me to hide my face. It equated cruelty with safety. If I crushed her out of spite, I became a mirror image of the very toxicity I was trying to escape. I placed the report into a secure drawer and locked it. I did not confront her. I refused to let her venom dictate my morality. The fabricated story never ran. The rival blog, fearing the Meridian legal team, buried the email pitch entirely. Preston noticed the silence. He monitored the local media landscape, waiting for the fallout of Harper's strike, and found only a chilling, undisturbed calm. His survival instincts flared. He realized my defenses were much stronger than he anticipated. The invisible sister he had dismissed for years was suddenly exhibiting the operational security of a corporate titan. Sensing his own exposure, Preston pivoted his strategy. If he could not destroy me with a fabricated rumor, he would hunt for a verified truth. He stopped relying on Harper erratic tantrums and began quietly digging into my professional past. He sought real leverage. He reached out to old disgruntled camera operators, former station managers, and rival producers. He combed through public records and old broadcast logs. He was searching for a real mistake, a buried misstep from my early days in the control room that could credibly stain my newfound integrity if spun to the press. The realization that Preston was actively hunting a genuine vulnerability shifted the dynamic of the impending war. He was no longer a clown hiding behind forged signatures. He was a cornered predator gathering real ammunition. I knew I had a few skeletons in my professional closet. Years ago, I took the fall for a senior executive scheduling error to protect my job security. It was a minor infraction at the time, but in the hands of a desperate talent agent, it could be weaponized to cast doubt on my ethical standing just days before a statewide premiere. The reader of the room could sense the danger. He might actually find something damaging. I brought the intelligence home to Marcus. We stood in the kitchen, the city lights painting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I detailed Harper's sloppy attack and Preston's quiet, methodical excavation of my past. I admitted my fear that Preston might actually unearth a buried error, something true enough to spin into a career-ending scandal. Marcus leaned against the granite counter, watching me with a steady, grounding gaze. He did not offer a quick legal fix. He saw the internal war waging behind my eyes. He understood the temptation to strike preemptively, to use the forged mortgage documents to obliterate them before they could land a blow. He crossed his arms over his chest, demanding my full attention. Sophia Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension with crystal clarity. "When it is time, do you want justice or do you want to win?" The morning of the premiere broke over Atlanta with a crisp, clear light. In the affluent enclave of Buckhead, my parents prepared to celebrate a victory that did not belong to them. Richard and Evelyn, ignorant of the fraudulent $500,000 mortgage threatening to consume their estate, had spared no expense. They hosted a lavish catered watch party in their sprawling living room. The guest list functioned as a carefully curated roster of the city elite, including wealthy socialites, country club associates, and prominent local politicians. Waiters in starched white shirts circulated with silver trays, offering crystal flutes filled with expensive mimosas. Harper positioned herself in the dead center of the room. She wore a stunning custom designer gown that looked more appropriate for a glamorous evening gala than a morning television viewing party. She basked in the unearned admiration of the affluent crowd. Guests approached her offering preemptive congratulations, treating her like an impending television icon. She smiled graciously, soaking up the spotlight, entirely convinced that her face was about to replace the mystery silhouette broadcast across the state. She believed she had finally secured the ultimate validation she craved. She was blissfully unaware that she was sitting on a ticking time bomb. Miles away inside the fortified security of the Meridian Broadcasting downtown studios, the atmosphere carried a different kind of electric tension. I sat behind the sweeping lucite anchor desk. The studio air remained a heavily regulated 64 degrees, but a faint sheen of sweat gathered at the nape of my neck. I wore a sharp, impeccably tailored crimson blazer. My hair was styled sleek and practical, my makeup applied to enhance authority rather than manufacture artificial beauty. 10 seconds. The floor director voice sounded in my earpiece, slicing through the sterile quiet. I placed my hands flat on the polished desk surface. To the unseen cameras waiting in the dark, I projected an image of absolute, unwavering composure. But beneath the desk out of frame, my right hand gripped my left knee. My fingernails dug through the wool fabric of my trousers, pressing hard enough to leave distinct bruises in my own skin. The action mirrored the precise moment from 3 months prior, but the context had fundamentally shifted. Taking this seat required shedding the invisibility that had functioned as my armor since childhood. The cost of being seen was staggering. 5 seconds. The floor manager raised his hand, his fingers folding one by one in a silent countdown. The heavy thumping rhythm of my pulse filled my ears. The teleprompter hummed, displaying the opening script I had memorized over 100 times. The red tally light on camera 1 bloomed into a bright, piercing crimson. "Good morning, Georgia," I said, my voice steady, resonant, and perfectly pitched to command the room. "I am Sophia Brown, and you are watching Atlanta Daybreak." I delivered the opening segment without a single hesitation. I outlined the complex nuances of a recent municipal transit bond, breaking down the dense financial jargon into accessible, urgent journalism. There was no cheerful co-host bantering beside me. There was no fluffy lifestyle segment offering beauty tips or superficial gossip. The broadcast relied entirely on my intellect and my unblinking delivery. I held the camera lens, utilizing the exact same focus I once used to manipulate data in the shadows. On the surface, the moment represented an absolute victory. I had claimed the chair. I had proven the childhood lie false. I was seen, and I was competent. The initial segment concluded flawlessly, bridging into the first scheduled commercial break. The red light blinked off, and the floor director offered a silent, approving thumbs up. I reached for my water glass, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. I had survived the launch. I had won the battle against my own deeply entrenched insecurities. But the taste of that victory turned instantly bitter before the commercial break even ended. Vance Okafor, the ruthless network president, stepped onto the studio floor. He moved with the quiet, aggressive swagger of an executive who had just secured a massive ratings spike. He bypassed the floor director and walked directly up to the anchor desk. He leaned over the lucite surface, offering a wide, satisfied grin that felt entirely too predatory. Brilliant execution. Sophia Okafor murmured his voice low enough to avoid the open microphones. The focus groups are already tracking a massive positive response. You hit the exact demographic we needed. "Thank you, Vance," I replied, keeping my tone professional, setting my water glass down. "The research team provided excellent background data." He waved a hand, dismissing the praise. "It is not just the data, Sophia. It is the narrative." He leaned in closer, his eyes gleaming with a dark, calculating amusement. "We knew the mystery anchor campaign would drive initial viewership, but the real hook is the familial connection." My spine stiffened. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, but the air in my lungs suddenly felt thin. "What familial connection, Vance?" Okafor chuckled, a harsh, cynical sound that echoed softly in the cavernous studio. "Come on, Sophia. You did not honestly think a network of this magnitude would fail to vet the immediate family of our new lead anchor. We knew about your sister from the very first background check. We knew she audited for this exact chair and threw a spectacular tantrum when the prompter died." I stared at him, the cold, clinical realization creeping into my bloodstream. "We recognize the inherent drama." Okafor continued, clearly immensely proud of his own manipulative genius. The pretty influencer sister failing, and the brilliant behind-the-scenes producer claiming the spotlight. It is television gold. For the past 2 weeks, the marketing department has been quietly seeding the sibling rivalry angle to select regional press outlets. We planted blind items. We hinted at a massive family upset. The media is primed for the fallout. He tapped his knuckles against the desk. When the blogs realize that your sister has been telling the entire Buckhead social scene that she secured this job, the resulting humiliation will generate a viral media cycle that no advertising budget could ever buy. You did not just give us a solid morning broadcast, Sophia. You gave us a spectacular family train wreck to broadcast to the entire state. The words slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The clean, hard-fought victory I thought I had secured was instantly contaminated. Okafor had not just chosen me for my intellect. He chose me because my very existence functioned as a weapon he could wield for ratings. He engineered the promotional blackout, not just to build suspense, but to deliberately amplify Harper's impending public humiliation. He had manipulated the timeline, allowing her delusion to reach its maximum tragic height, knowing the inevitable crash would dominate the news cycle. I was not the author of my own redemption. I was simply a highly paid pawn in his ruthless ratings game. He was using me to deliver a devastating, crushing blow to my family on live television to an audience he had intentionally primed to watch them burn. The victory I had fought my own psychology to claim was revealed to be a meticulously constructed cage. 10 seconds back, Okafor, the floor director, called out, breaking the heavy silence between us. Okafor offered one last satisfied smirk and stepped back into the shadows of the studio floor. I looked down at the lucite desk, my hands trembling slightly. I had wanted to defeat the lie that kept me hidden. I wanted to prove I was worthy of the light. I never wanted to become the instrument of their public destruction. I never wanted to humiliate them for the entertainment of strangers. 5 seconds. The floor manager raised his hand. The countdown resumed. The red light on camera 1 blinked back into existence, blazing like a warning beacon. I looked directly into the glass lens. I forced my posture upright. I offered the viewers a steady, confident smile, holding the broadcast together through sheer professional discipline. I delivered the next headline flawlessly, projecting the image of absolute, unbothered authority, while underneath the tailored crimson blazer, everything I thought I had won turned rapidly to ash. The fallout was instantaneous. In the sprawling living room of the Buckhead estate, the cheerful ambient chatter of my parents' catered watch party died into a paralyzed, suffocating silence. Dozens of Atlanta's most influential socialites, politicians, and country club elites stood frozen, holding crystal flutes of expensive champagne. They stared at the massive 80-inch television screen mounted above the marble fireplace. Harper sat in the dead center of the room, wearing the designer gown she had purchased specifically for this triumphant moment. Her smile, meticulously practiced and aimed at the audience she intended to conquer, fractured into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The opening montage of Atlanta Daybreak finished playing. The screen cut not to Harper's flawless, cosmetically enhanced features, but to my sharp, unyielding face delivering the morning headlines. The fabricated reality she had constructed over the past 3 months detonated with devastating force. Harper did not handle the revelation with grace. She did not attempt to mask her shock or pretend this was a planned surprise. The delusion broke her mind entirely. She let out a guttural, piercing scream that shattered the silence of the opulent room. She surged to her feet, overturning her plush velvet chair. "It is a mistake!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the television screen. "They put the wrong tape on. That is my sister. That is the producer. She is not the anchor." The guests exchanged horrified, uncomfortable glances, actively backing away from the center of the room. The polite Southern etiquette they valued above all else was powerless against an active psychological collapse. Preston rushed forward, attempting to grab her arm to quiet her down. He realized the disastrous implications of the broadcast instantly. Without Harper's imaginary network contract, the fraudulent $500,000 mortgage he orchestrated was essentially a ticking bomb placed under his own chair. "Do not touch me," Harper yelled, shoving Preston away with surprising violence. She turned to the crowd, her eyes wild and frantic, grasping desperately for any narrative that preserved her victimhood. She stole it. Sophia must have slept with an executive to get that chair. She sabotaged my audition. She is a jealous, ugly thief. She grabbed her crystal mimosa glass from a nearby side table. In a fit of unhinged fury, she hurled the glass directly at the television. It missed the screen, shattering violently against the heavy marble mantel of the fireplace. Glass shards and sticky orange liquid rained down onto the pristine Persian rug. The humiliation was absolute. The city elite watched the golden child of the Brown family completely unravel, confirming every whispered rumor about her instability. My mother Evelyn panicked. The public destruction of her carefully curated social standing was an unforgivable offense. She needed to restore order immediately. She needed to control the narrative before the gossip reached the country club. Evelyn abandoned the horrified guests rushing down the hallway to the privacy of my father mahogany study. She slammed the door shut, pulled her phone from her pocket, and dialed my personal cell number. Miles away in the Meridian Broadcasting Studio, the second commercial break began. The red tally light blinked off. I removed my earpiece, exhaling a slow, measured breath. My personal phone resting on the console beneath the desk vibrated aggressively. The caller ID flashed my mother name. The timing was entirely predictable. I picked up the device, accepting the call. I did not offer a greeting. Sophia Evelyn demanded, her voice a frantic, shrill whisper. "You need to step down right now. You need to march into that control room and tell them there has been a terrible mistake. You must demand they put your sister on the air tomorrow morning." I stared at the blank monitor on the desk, gripping the phone tightly. "Mom, I cannot do that," I said, keeping my tone level. "I signed a contract. I am the lead anchor of this broadcast. You are destroying her," Evelyn screamed, abandoning any pretense of maternal affection. "Harper is having a severe mental breakdown in our living room. Our friends are watching her fall apart. She cannot handle this level of public embarrassment. Your selfishness is literally destroying your sister's mental health. You have always been jealous of her, and now you are using this network to punish her. You must fix this, Sophia. You owe her this. Step aside and let her have the chair she deserves." I listened to her frantic, toxic demands. For one agonizing breath, the old familiar shame surfaced. The invisible daughter who spent 34 years keeping the peace, desperate to avoid conflict, flared to life inside my chest. The instinct to fold, to surrender my hard-earned victory just to stop my mother's screaming, pulled at my resolve. I almost said yes. I almost agreed to march upstairs, breach my contract, and slide quietly back into the shadows where they believed I belonged. The temptation to revert to my designated role was profound and terrifyingly real. But I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the monitor. I saw the woman who had delivered a flawless broadcast entirely on her own merit. I saw the woman Marcus reminded me I could be. I felt the lie cracking, and I refused to glue the pieces back together. I declined the demand, but I did so with restraint. I did not deliver a clinical kill shot. I did not coldly cite the fraudulent mortgage and hang up. I attempted the decent thing despite her cruelty. "I am not stepping down, Mom." I stated, my voice firm, but devoid of malice. "Harper delusion is not my responsibility to manage. And Mom," I paused, searching for a clumsy way to warn her about the impending financial ruin hovering over her estate. "There is something about the house we need to talk about, something Preston did. But we cannot do it like this. We need to sit down privately. I do not want to hear your lies about Preston." Evelyn snapped, cutting me off entirely. "He is trying to comfort your sister while you try to ruin her life. Do not ever call this house again until you are ready to apologize." The line went dead. A harsh, abrupt click filled the silence of the studio. Evelyn hung up on me, refusing to hear the warning that could have saved her. The rejection stung, but it clarified the tragedy of my parents' enabling. I attempted the right action, and they chose their own destruction. Back at the Buckhead estate, the situation escalated rapidly. Preston watched Harper thrash and weep on the living room floor, surrounded by horrified guests. He realized the television contract was never real. The imaginary safety net he used to justify the fraudulent $500,000 mortgage was entirely gone. The fraud clock was now running at terrifying speed. The bank would eventually notice the missed payments. Richard would eventually notice the lien on his property. Preston was staring down a lengthy federal prison sentence for bank fraud and identity theft. He needed leverage immediately. He needed cash to cover the stolen equity, and he needed a target vulnerable enough to extort. He realized his sloppy, impulsive wife was useless. He shifted his focus from defense to offense. He abandoned the weeping Harper, stepping away from the crowd to pull his phone from his pocket. Preston was a desperate man, but he was not stupid. During the weeks Harper spiraled into paranoia, Preston had methodically hunted for a genuine vulnerability in my professional armor. He combed through old broadcast logs, tracking down former station managers and rival producers. He sought a real mistake, a buried misstep from my early days in the control room. And he found one. He found an incident true enough to weaponize an event that could credibly stain my brand new journalistic integrity if spun effectively to the press. He pulled up my contact information. He did not threaten to sue me for stealing Harper's job. He did not yell or demand an apology. He deployed the menace with chilling precision. My phone buzzed on the anchor desk. A single text message illuminated the screen. The sender was Preston. We should talk. Privately. Before I decide what to do with what I found. The threat hung in the sterile studio air. The bad guys were closing in, and for the first time the danger felt incredibly real. The conflict shifted from a petty family dispute into a high-stakes battle for survival. The glass lobby of Meridian Broadcasting resembles a pristine high-tech fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows face the busy Atlanta streets, capturing the harsh glare of the morning sun. I knew Harper lacked impulse control. Decades of watching her throw tantrums whenever reality failed to meet her expectations taught me exactly how she would react to the morning broadcast. Anticipating her frantic arrival, I had provided the head of building security with high-resolution photographs of both my sister and her husband early that morning. I flagged them as hostile, unauthorized individuals. When Harper and Preston sped away from the ruined watch party in Buckhead and descended upon the downtown studios, they hit an impenetrable wall. They tried to bully their way past the sleek biometric turnstiles, claiming a binding verbal contract with network executives. The security team, acting on my direct orders, detained them instantly within the glass-enclosed visitor vestibule. My executive producer flanked me as I stepped into the polished steel elevator. 2 armed corporate security guards stood behind us, forming a quiet, protective barrier. The descent to the ground floor took exactly 40 seconds. I used that time to regulate my pulse. I was no longer the shrinking producer fetching coffee and dodging insults. I was the lead anchor, and I carried the full weight of the network behind me. The elevator doors glided open, revealing the bright, expansive lobby. Harper spotted me immediately. She slammed her palms against the thick, soundproof glass separating the vestibule from the main atrium. Her designer gown looked rumpled. Her flawless makeup was streaked with angry tears. I walked forward, stopping just out of her reach on the other side of the glass barrier. A small intercom speaker allowed our voices to cross the divide. "You are a jealous, ugly thief," Harper shrieked, her voice carrying a raw, frantic edge through the speaker. "You stole my life. You slept your way into that chair because you knew you could never earn it on your own. You sabotaged my audition out of spite." The accusations were predictable, worn-out scripts she used to deflect accountability. I stood perfectly composed, looking at her smeared mascara and trembling hands. I felt no urge to gloat. I felt no desire to insult her intelligence or mock her cosmetic choices. I simply saw a woman trapped in a shallow reality she constructed for herself. I leaned slightly toward the intercom microphone. I kept my tone even, stripping away any trace of venom or sisterly rivalry. "You told me I belonged in the background, Harper," I said, stating the fact with quiet clarity. "You told me my face disqualified me from the light. I believed you for 11 years. I organized my entire life around your assessment." I looked her directly in the eyes, refusing to break the connection. "That was the mistake. But the mistake was mine, not yours." I let the words hang in the space between us. It was not an insult. It was the heavy chain of my childhood being named and dropped onto the floor. Harper stopped striking the glass. The air went out of her lungs. She had no script for a sister who refused to fight back with cruelty. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, searching for a harsh retort that would restore her superiority. Before she could find the words, Preston stepped forward. He placed a firm hand on Harper's shoulder, pulling her back from the glass. He did not look angry. He did not yell or pound his fists. Preston smiled. It was a cold, calculating expression that instantly elevated the danger in the room. He smoothed the lapels of his linen suit, projecting the slick confidence of a talent agent who believed he held the winning hand. "Congratulations on the debut," Sophia Preston said, his voice smooth and steady through the intercom. "It is a remarkable achievement. Truly. But television is a fragile industry. Audiences demand pristine journalistic integrity from their morning anchors. It would be a terrible shame if a shadow from the past ruined such a promising fresh start." The blood in my veins cooled. He was not threatening a baseless lawsuit over a fake verbal contract. He was aiming for a vital organ. 6 years ago, during my tenure as a junior segment producer, a senior executive rushed a high-profile investigative piece to air without properly vetting the primary source. When the source turned out to be fraudulent, the network faced severe backlash. To protect the executive and secure my own upward mobility, I agreed to sign my name to the internal error report, accepting the blame for the sourcing failure. It was a buried, localized misstep, resolved quietly behind closed doors. But in the current climate, if a skilled manipulator spun that documented admission of journalistic negligence to the press, it would look like I had a history of fabricating news. It would credibly stain my brand-new integrity before my first week ended. Preston leaned closer to the glass, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "I have some very interesting internal memos from 6 years ago, Sophia. Documents showing you claimed responsibility for airing unverified defamatory content. A hungry reporter at a rival network might look at those memos and wonder if your current investigative segments are just as fabricated. They might wonder if Meridian Broadcasting knows about your history of ethical breaches." He let the threat settle. He was competent. He had dug past the superficial family drama and unearthed a genuine, credible weapon. For the first time since the broadcast began, a sliver of genuine doubt crept into my mind. I wondered if I could actually survive the mud he was preparing to sling. Preston watched my silent processing, and his smile widened. He assumed he had achieved checkmate. Because everyone in my family had spent decades underestimating the invisible sister, Preston had no idea who he was actually dealing with. He thought I was alone. He thought I was an isolated producer, desperate to cling to a fragile new job. He had zero knowledge of the sprawling, airtight legal net Marcus had spent weeks constructing around his fraudulent financial activities. Preston thought he was the smartest predator in the building. He viewed me as soft prey. I maintained my neutral expression, giving him nothing to feed his ego. I signaled to the security guards indicating the conversation was over. We turned to walk away, leaving them locked in the glass vestibule to await a police escort off the premises. Preston tapped the glass one final time, drawing my attention back just as I turned away. "Think about your parents' house, Sophia," Preston said, his voice dropping into a low, menacing register through the speaker. Funny how much is riding on it. He knew I had discovered the forged secondary mortgage. He knew I held the evidence of his $500,000 bank fraud. He was laying out the terms of his extortion plain and simple. He held my career hostage with the buried memos, and he held my parents' estate hostage with the illicit debt. The two isolated plots, the financial ruin of my family and the sabotage of my revenge, were now inextricably locked together. I walked back to the elevators, the polished steel doors sliding shut, to carry me upward while the true weight of the war settled squarely onto my shoulders. The high-altitude air in my executive office felt thin. The euphoria of the broadcast premiere had entirely evaporated, replaced by a creeping, suffocating pressure. I sat behind my desk staring at a secure email Marcus forwarded to my private server. Preston was moving with terrifying speed. Driven by the rapidly ticking clock of his financial ruin, he had escalated his threats within hours of leaving the Meridian lobby. The true but minor misstep from 6 years ago was not lethal enough to secure the $500,000 he desperately needed to cover his forged mortgage. He knew a savvy public relations team could spin an old internal memo as a youthful error taking responsibility for a superior mistake. It might tarnish my debut, but it would not destroy me. Preston needed a kill shot. A kill. He needed leverage so devastating that I would hand over my network salary without a fight. His desperation pushed his competence straight over the edge into catastrophic arrogance. He assumed the quiet, invisible sister who had absorbed decades of family insults would crumble under the threat of public scandal. He believed I lacked the spine for a prolonged street fight. This contempt blinded him. He decided to manufacture the weapon he lacked. The encrypted email contained a terrifying digital preview. Preston had compiled a fabricated dossier. He utilized his deep connections in the shady underbelly of the talent agency world to produce high-grade doctored evidence. The file contained manipulated audio clips engineered using advanced deepfake software. The audio simulated my voice engaging in explicit corporate espionage offering to leak proprietary network algorithms to rival stations in exchange for the anchor chair. Alongside the audio were forged digital communications appearing to show me blackmailing Vance Okafor with fabricated sexual harassment allegations to secure my contract. The dossier was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted a picture of a ruthless Machiavellian predator who stole the morning broadcast through illicit illegal channels. Preston laid out his ultimatum in a crisp, unapologetic bulleted list. He demanded I immediately wire $500,000 from my new network salary to his commercial holding account, effectively paying off the fraudulent secondary mortgage he took out on my parents' Buckhead estate. Furthermore, he demanded I use my newly acquired leverage at Meridian Broadcasting to secure a lucrative co-hosting contract for Harper, guaranteeing her a spot beside me on the morning show. If I complied, he promised to permanently destroy the fabricated dossier. If I refused, he would release the doctored audio and forged emails to every major media outlet in the country, ending my television career before my first week concluded. The logic behind his extortion was brutal but sound. The dossier was entirely fake, but the modern media landscape rarely waits for forensic authentication. In the fast-paced world of broadcast journalism, a scandal of this magnitude spreads like a virus. By the time a digital forensics team proved the audio was manipulated, the network executives would have already terminated my contract to protect the brand. Advertisers would flee. My reputation, built over a decade in the shadows, would be reduced to ash. Fakes destroy careers long before the truth ever catches up. A profound, heavy stillness settled over me. The walls of the office seemed to close in, narrowing my options until none remained. For the first time since stepping into the anchor chair, I faced an impossible board. I had no clean move. If I fought Preston and refused the extortion, he would detonate the fake scandal, ruining my career and pushing my parents into a devastating federal bank fraud investigation when the mortgage defaulted. If I paid the ransom, I would save my parents' estate and protect my fragile new position, but I would become a permanent hostage to my brother-in-law. I would have to share the desk with the sister who told me I was too ugly to be seen. I would be funding the very monsters I was trying to escape. The overwhelming urge to surrender rose in my chest. The lie I had battled my entire life whispered its comforting toxic siren song. It told me to just pay the money. It told me to buy the silence, protect the family, and step back from the glaring light. It promised me that returning to the shadows was the only way to stay safe. I felt the powerful magnetic pull to simply fold, to let Preston win, because fighting required a level of ruthlessness I was not sure I possessed. I looked across the office at Marcus. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette dark against the Atlanta skyline. He had read the extortion demands. He understood the legal and professional gravity of the deepfake audio. He knew a prolonged public fight could shatter everything we had built. He turned away from the glass and met my gaze. He did not offer a comforting smile. He did not tell me everything would magically work out. He treated me with the respect of a partner facing a firing squad. Marcus walked over to the desk, resting his hands flat on the polished wood. The soft hum of the city traffic below barely penetrated the thick window panes. He looked at the printed copy of Preston email resting near my keyboard. "If we do this, we do it inside the law." Marcus stated his voice a low, unyielding rumble. "The second we bend to this extortion, the second you pay him a single dime to bury a lie, you become them. You validate every cruel thing they ever said about you. You hand them the keys to your life permanently." I stared at the black text of the printed email. The choice was a razor blade resting against my palm. I could bleed quietly, or I could grip the blade and fight back. I thought about the little girl cropped out of the family portrait. I thought about the terrified producer gripping her knee under the lucite desk. I thought about the woman who delivered a flawless 10-minute broadcast this morning. I reached out and picked up the printed email. I did not tear it. I folded it neatly in half and placed it inside my leather briefcase. The desire to hide evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical resolve. I would not buy my safety. I would not surrender the chair. I would not cheat the system to match his depravity. "We do not pay," I told Marcus, looking him directly in the eyes. "And we do not fold. We let him play his hand." The decision was finalized. We were stepping into the fire entirely inside the law. The decision to fight did not bring immediate relief. It triggered an avalanche. Preston was a predator who understood the mechanics of a slow bleed. When 72 hours passed without a frantic wire transfer or a panicked phone call from me begging for a negotiation, he executed his warning shot. He did not drop the entire fabricated dossier. He acted with calculated restraint, releasing a microscopic sliver of the doctored audio to a mid-tier Atlanta media blog known for trafficking in unverified gossip. The audio clip was barely 15 seconds long, featuring a synthesized version of my voice discussing proprietary network data drops. It was a fragment devoid of context, but loaded with lethal implication. The whisper moved through the local media ecosystem with the speed of a lit match hitting dry brush. Within 4 hours, the rumor breached the fortified glass walls of Meridian Broadcasting. The corporate crisis alarms I usually managed for other anchors were suddenly ringing for me. Vance Okafor summoned me to his corner suite. The panoramic view of the city skyline offered zero comfort. The network president sat behind his expansive desk, evaluating me not as a star anchor, but as a potential toxic liability. Okafor had engineered the familial conflict to drive premier ratings, but corporate espionage was a different beast entirely. It threatened the foundational integrity of the network. He did not ask if the leaked audio was authentic. He operated purely on optics. If this story gains traction, Sophia Okafor stated, his voice carrying the chill of absolute corporate pragmatism. "We have a severe problem. I backed your transition because you offered a compelling narrative. But if this espionage angle shadows the relaunch, I will sever your contract to protect the brand. The chair is yours right now, but it is not bolted to the floor. Clean this up by Friday, or we issue a statement claiming mutual separation." The threat was not a bluff. The anchor desk, the hard-won exposure, the victory I had wrestled from my own deeply entrenched insecurities, it was all suddenly highly conditional. My professional sanctuary hung by a thread spun entirely from Preston's malicious lie. I left Okafor office feeling the structural integrity of my new life fracturing. The assault compounded later that evening. I returned to the Midtown condo, seeking the quiet refuge of my study. The phone rang sharply. The caller ID displayed the landline from the Buckhead estate. I answered, bracing for the impact. My father did not offer a greeting. Richard was a man who defined his entire existence by his social standing within the country club elite. He had caught wind of the bubbling internet rumor regarding my supposed corporate espionage and the whispers of a severe financial irregularity connected to Preston Talent Agency. The impending collision of public scandal and financial ruin terrified him. He did not ask for the truth. He demanded compliance. "You are dragging this family into the mud." "Sophia." Richard barked, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "Whatever petty game you are playing with your brother-in-law, you will end it tonight. You are causing a spectacle. I will not have my reputation smeared because you cannot manage your professional rivalries quietly." My mother snatched the receiver, her voice pitching into a frantic, desperate whine. "Sophia, please," Evelyn begged, abandoning any pretense of maternal authority. "Preston said you owe him money for a consulting fee. He said if you just pay the $500,000, this terrible media rumor goes away. Just pay him. We are your family. You have a massive new network salary. You can afford to make this disappear. Do it for Harper. Do it for us before everything falls apart." The betrayal was staggering in its efficiency. They were actively demanding I submit to a felony extortion plot. They were demanding I drain my own bank accounts to pay off the forged secondary mortgage Preston took out against their own home simply to avoid the embarrassment of confronting the golden child husband. They wanted me to buy their peace with my blood. I hung up the phone without offering a single word of confirmation or denial. The silence in the dark study was absolute. I stood in front of the large glass window, my reflection superimposed over the distant city lights. The exact same posture, the exact same lighting as the night Marcus discovered the forged mortgage. But the stakes had mutated into something terrifyingly heavy. Everything was collapsing simultaneously. The network was preparing to cut me loose. My parents were enabling my extortion. My sister was gleefully anticipating my destruction. I hit rock bottom. The cold, familiar shame I had fought so hard to banish flooded my chest, rising until I could barely draw a breath. I stared at the sharp angles of my face in the glass. The dark, insidious voice in my head grew louder, echoing the cruel insults from the sweet tea station. The lie I had carried since childhood returned with a vengeance demanding submission. Maybe Harper was right. The thought twisted like a knife. Maybe being seen was always going to cost me everything. The universe seemed to be actively punishing me for daring to step out of the shadows. The control room had been safe. The background had been secure. The moment I claimed the light, the fire started burning. The temptation to surrender became an overwhelming physical weight. I could wire the money tomorrow morning. I could call Okafor and resign, citing personal health reasons. I could disappear back into the comfortable, numb invisibility where no one could target me because no one would remember I existed. I nearly opened the banking application. I nearly drafted the resignation email. I felt the presence in the doorway before he spoke. Marcus leaned against the wooden frame, watching me stare into the dark glass. He saw the defeat settling over my shoulders. He knew the internal war was reaching a critical, devastating climax. He did not rush forward to hug me. He did not offer empty reassurances that the bad guys would miraculously lose. He understood that rescuing me would only validate the lie that I was weak. He had to remind me of the truth. Sophia, Marcus said, his voice a steady, anchoring rumble, cutting through the toxic noise in my head. "I need you to remember the woman who walked down the metal staircase at Meridian 3 weeks ago." I closed my eyes, recalling the blinding glare of the studio lights, the paralyzing terror gripping my chest, and the heavy silence of the control room, watching my every move. "You were terrified," Marcus continued, taking a slow step into the study. "Every instinct told you to stay behind the soundproof glass, but you stepped onto that set anyway. You sat in that chair without a script, and you held the entire room using nothing but the brilliant mind you spent a decade honing in the dark. You did not survive that broadcast because of luck. You survived because you are a titan." I opened my eyes, looking at his reflection, standing solid and unyielding behind me. "This is the final trick," Marcus said, stepping closer. "The lie wants you to believe the only way to be safe is to vanish again. It wants you to think that hiding protects you from pain. But hiding did not protect you from Harper cruelty. It only allowed it to grow." The realization hit me with the force of a physical strike. The truth the story had been proving all along finally crystallized in my mind, shattering the childhood conditioning completely. My worth was never defined by remaining unseen. And my worth was not defined by the public validation of being seen on a television screen either. My true profound value rested entirely in refusing to become the thing that wounded me. I did not need to hide, and I did not need to destroy them out of spite. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the cold, clinical power wash away the residual shame. The panic evaporated, leaving behind a sharpened, diamond-hard resolve. I turned away from the glass window facing my husband. "We are not paying a single dime," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute chilling certainty. "I am not resigning from the network, and I am not going to let them burn my life down out of hate." I walked over to my heavy mahogany desk and powered up the encrypted laptop. The path forward was narrow, dangerous, and required flawless execution. I would not engage in a messy public mudslinging match. I would end this cleanly. I would dismantle their fraudulent empire entirely through the rigid, unyielding mechanisms of the law, and I would do it in broad daylight. The dark night of the soul was over. The counteroffensive was officially authorized. Armed with the absolute truth regarding my own worth, I moved with a cold, calculated velocity. The paralyzing fear was gone. The plan required precision pacing and a deep understanding of Preston's psychological flaws. I needed his own boundless arrogance to spring the trap, ensuring the retribution was flawlessly earned. We were not going to lure him into a physical law office. A slick talent agent operating a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme would instantly recognize a hostile legal ambush. He was wary, currently holding the fabricated deepfake audio like a loaded weapon. We needed him to fire the weapon, believing he was hitting a defenseless target. Marcus initiated the sequence on a Thursday morning, calling Preston private agency line. Marcus played his role perfectly, adopting the tense, exhausted tone of a husband desperate to protect his wife's career from a looming scandal. He feigned total capitulation. He told Preston that the network executives were circling, that the pressure was crushing me, and that we were ready to meet his financial demands to make the story disappear permanently. I listened to the call through the encrypted speakerphone in my home office. Preston let out a low, satisfied chuckle. The sound grated against my nerves, but I maintained my focus. He bought the performance entirely. He believed the invisible sister had finally cracked under the blinding pressure of the spotlight. "We are ready to pay the $500,000, Marcus stated, his voice tight with manufactured defeat. "But I am a corporate attorney, Preston. I do not wire $500,000 into a commercial holding account based on a verbal gentleman agreement. I need a documented guarantee. I need a binding non-disclosure contract outlining the exact terms of the payment, ensuring you destroy the fabricated audio files and the forged emails the moment the funds clear. We need this documented to protect both sides." Preston hesitated. The request for a documented paper trail for an extortion payment was highly unorthodox. A smarter, more disciplined criminal would have refused demanding untraceable cryptocurrency and a burner phone confirmation. But Preston was drowning in his own hubris. He was desperate for the cash to cover the forged secondary mortgage before the bank issued a default notice. More importantly, his lifelong contempt for me blinded his strategic judgment. He still viewed me as the ugly duckling producer, incapable of launching a sophisticated counteroffensive. He assumed Marcus was just a frantic husband trying to implement standard legal safeguards out of panic. "I will draft the terms," Preston agreed, his voice dripping with condescending triumph. "I will outline the payment schedule and the guaranteed destruction of the digital assets. I will send you a secure link to review the contract by noon. And I need proof of life on the leverage," Marcus added, pushing the trap 1 inch further. "I need you to attach a clean sample of the deepfake audio to the email. I need to verify you actually hold the complete file before I authorize the wire transfer." "Consider it done," Preston replied, ending the call with a sharp click. He believed he was closing the most lucrative deal of his entire life. He thought he had outsmarted a media rights attorney and broken a rising television anchor. He had absolutely no idea he was dealing with a woman who had spent the last 11 years mastering the exact mechanics of how digital information moves, how metadata is authenticated, and how networks secure data. The invisibility Harper mocked at the sweet tea station was no longer a liability. It was the ultimate weapon. I sat at my mahogany desk, watching the encrypted email server monitor. The trap relied entirely on the routing. Preston Talent Agency utilized a cloud-based server farm physically located in Virginia. My private server was hosted in a data center in downtown Atlanta. The geographical distance was the key. At precisely 11:42 a.m., the notification chimed. An email from Preston official agency account landed in the secure inbox. I did not open it immediately. I ran a sterile diagnostic script to extract the packet routing history without triggering read receipts. The data populated on my secondary monitor. Preston had typed his extortion demands explicitly, outlining the requirement of $500,000 in exchange for the suppression of the attached media files. He attached a high-resolution MP3 file containing a 15-second snippet of the fabricated deepfake audio. He hit send from his agency laptop, routing the demands through the Virginia servers and delivering them directly into my Georgia jurisdiction. The second the transmission verified, the trap snapped shut with devastating legal force. Transmitting fabricated evidence and monetary threats across state lines via an electronic communication network is not a simple local misdemeanor. It is the textbook definition of federal wire fraud and felony extortion. By placing his demands in writing and attaching the digital contraband, Preston had bypassed the murky waters of a he said, she said dispute. He handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation a fully documented, digitally signed confession. Furthermore, the written demand for exactly $500,000 provided the corroborating link Marcus needed for the real estate fraud. It perfectly matched the exact dollar amount of the illegal secondary mortgage Preston took out on my parents' Buckhead estate using my father-forged signature. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, reading the extracted metadata. He got greedy. Marcus murmured, a cold, predatory satisfaction settling into his voice. He tied the extortion directly to the bank fraud. We have the entire chain of custody. I pulled a separate file from my encrypted drive, integrating it into the master dossier. It was a digital audio log containing the brief snippet of conversation I overheard weeks ago while standing by the sweet tea urn. The memory resurfaced sharp and clear, Preston pacing behind the boxwood hedges, his voice tight with panic, assuring an unseen caller the equity it has covered. Relax. The draw is processing next month. I had filed it away without understanding the context at the time. Now the foreshadowing paid a massive dividend. I cross-referenced the timestamp of that patio phone call with the municipal filing dates of the forged secondary mortgage. They aligned flawlessly. The overheard conversation proved Preston had premeditated knowledge of the fraudulent equity extraction long before he initiated the extortion plot against me. The Chekhov gun I unknowingly loaded during the family party had just fired a lethal, undeniable shot into the center of his defense. The dossier was almost complete. It contained the federal extortion email, the deepfake audio sample, the municipal property liens, proving the forged signature, and the time-stamped audio corroboration. It was a staggering mountain of evidence capable of burying Preston in a federal penitentiary for decades. But as I prepared to finalize the export, I paused. I looked at the property deeds bearing my father's forged signature. My parents had betrayed me repeatedly. They enabled Harper cruelty. They demanded I step down from my anchor chair to soothe her ego. They actively pressured me to pay the ransom to cover up the scandal, abandoning me to protect their own social standing. The anger burned hot and bright, urging me to let them suffer the full consequences of their enabling behavior. I could easily package the evidence to implicate them as complicit actors in the financial cover-up. I took a slow, deep breath, shutting down the vengeful impulse. I was building a case for the federal authorities, not executing a petty family vendetta. I made a crucial defining choice. I instructed Marcus to structure the legal brief so that it explicitly exonerated Richard and Evelyn. We formatted the evidence to clearly define my parents as unaware victims of Preston aggressive identity theft and bank fraud, separating them entirely from his guilt. I refused to let my personal trauma dictate a malicious legal strategy. I chose to enforce sacred justice, protecting the innocent victims, even when those victims had failed to protect me. Marcus reviewed the final formatting, his eyes scanning the impeccable legal architecture we had constructed. He nodded, snapping the digital folder shut. "The file is locked," Sophia Marcus said, stepping back from the desk. "The evidence is airtight." I looked at the glowing screen, the culmination of my strategic endurance, resting safely on the server. I did not feel the frantic urge to scream or the desperate need to gloat. I felt a profound, chilling peace. "Now we let the law do it," I stated, my voice sober and absolute. "Not me." The morning air in Centennial Olympic Park carried a crisp, undeniable energy. We were broadcasting live from the heart of downtown Atlanta. The outdoor set was surrounded by temporary steel barricades, holding back a massive crowd of early morning commuters, tourists, and eager fans of the newly relaunched program. The backdrop featured the towering skyline and the iconic Ferris wheel rotating slowly against a bright, cloudless sky. I sat at a sleek mobile anchor desk, wearing a tailored navy blazer, conducting rapid-fire interviews with local politicians and community leaders. The live remote broadcast was a logistical nightmare for the production crew, but a massive ratings triumph for the network. The energy was palpable. I operated with a razor-sharp focus, navigating complex municipal budget discussions while seamlessly managing the chaotic ambient noise of the park. My earpiece buzzed constantly with countdowns and camera cues. I was entirely in my element, controlling the narrative with absolute precision. The trouble began during a transition segment. I had just wrapped an interview with the city transit director and turned to camera 2 to deliver a brief update on regional economic development. Suddenly, a sharp, aggressive commotion erupted near the front perimeter of the crowd. A woman shoved violently through the barricades, bypassing a startled production assistant. She charged directly onto the outdoor set, her heels clicking loudly against the temporary staging floor. It was Harper. She looked completely unhinged. The flawless cosmetic facade she maintained so obsessively had fractured. Her designer trench coat hung askew, and her hair fell in messy, disorganized strands around her face. Driven by the rapidly closing legal net tightening around her husband, she had completely abandoned rational thought. She intended to hijack the live feed, utilizing the massive statewide audience to scream her fabricated victim narrative and destroy my credibility in front of thousands of watching eyes. "Sophia," she shrieked, her voice cracking as she marched directly into the frame of camera 2. "You are a liar. Tell them what you did. Tell everyone how you stole this job." The control room erupted into chaos. My earpiece exploded with frantic shouts. "Cut the feed! Go to commercial! Get security on the set now!" The floor director leaped forward, waving his arms desperately, trying to block the camera lens. I raised a single hand, a firm, authoritative gesture that stopped the floor director in his tracks. "Do not cut the feed," I commanded, my voice calm and resonant, cutting through the panic in my earpiece. "Keep rolling." I looked directly at Harper. I did not flinch. I did not summon security to drag her away screaming. I chose a different path. Harper had spent her entire life weaponizing her appearance, using visibility to mask a profound lack of substance. She believed the camera was her birthright, a magic mirror that would always reflect her manufactured perfection. I decided to let the camera do exactly what it was designed to do. I decided to let it see her clearly. "Ma'am," I said, projecting my voice smoothly across the live microphones, ensuring the entire park and the statewide audience heard every syllable. "You have stepped onto a live news broadcast. You are making very serious public allegations. I am an investigative journalist. If you have a statement regarding corporate misconduct, please present your evidence." Harper froze. She had anticipated a physical struggle. She expected me to panic, to order the cameras turned off, to scream at her in a fit of unprofessional rage. She was prepared for a dramatic, chaotic confrontation. She was completely unprepared for a calm, televised, journalistic inquiry. "You stole my contract," Harper stammered. her eyes darting nervously toward the large red tally light on the camera. "You used your producer connections to embezzle funds and sabotage my audition. You are a jealous fraud." She threw the accusations wildly, hoping the sheer volume of her claims would inflict damage. I did not insult her. I did not call her delusional or mock her appearance. I maintained a chilling professional detachment. I engaged her not as a sister, but as a hostile interview subject. "Those are significant claims," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Let us examine them. You assert that I sabotaged your audition for Meridian Broadcasting. Can you explain the specific technical mechanism I utilized to bypass the independent casting directors and alter your live screen test?" Harper opened her mouth, but no words came out. The question required a logical, factual response. It required a basic understanding of television production architecture. She possessed neither. She grasped blindly for a script that did not exist. "You turned off the teleprompter." Harper finally blurted out, her voice losing its aggressive edge. "You made the screen go blank so I could not read the news." I nodded slowly, allowing the silence to stretch for 2 agonizing seconds. The teleprompter failure is a documented standard industry stress test utilized for all prospective anchors, I stated, providing the context she lacked. It evaluates a candidate's ability to improvise breaking news during technical difficulties. When the prompter failed, what specific journalistic data did you rely on to continue your broadcast? Harper stared at me, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. She had no data. She had no historical knowledge. She had relied entirely on her pretty face, and when the script vanished, her face could not save her. She stood mute in front of the rolling camera, the silence broadcasting her profound incompetence to the entire state. The medium she believed she was born to conquer was systematically stripping away her disguise. "You also alleged corporate embezzlement," I continued, asking the third and final question. "Are you claiming to possess documented financial ledgers proving illicit fund transfers from the Meridian production budget?" "I do not need ledgers," Harper shrieked, her panic rising as the reality of her public exposure set in. "I know what you did. My husband knows what you did." The mention of Preston was a fatal error. It provided the perfect opening for total annihilation. I possessed the digital files proving Preston extortion plot. I held the property deeds proving his $500,000 bank fraud. I could have asked one single follow-up question regarding Preston fraudulent secondary mortgage and destroyed her publicly forever. I could have burned her life to ashes right there on live television. I looked at her trembling hands and her terrified eyes. I felt the immense, intoxicating power of the anchor chair. I could end her, but I stopped. I looked at the woman who had tormented me, who had driven me into the shadows, and I realized that crushing her out of spite would require stepping back into the very toxicity I had finally escaped. I refused to become the person who once made me feel like nothing. "We will have to leave the allegations there," I announced smoothly, turning my gaze away from Harper and locking directly onto camera 2. "We are going to take a short commercial break. When we return, we will dive into the regional transportation budget. You are watching Atlanta Daybreak." I signaled the floor director. The feed cut to black. The audience in the park let out a collective, breathless exhale. They saw my restraint and read it as immense professional strength. I knew it was mercy. As the commercial rolled, my earpiece crackled to life. Vance Okafor's voice boomed through the audio channel, vibrating with furious energy. "What are you doing?" Sophia Okafor demanded. "You had her. She is your sister. Name her on the air. Tell the audience she is your jealous sister. We can milk this family drama for a massive ratings spike. Expose her." I reached up and pressed my finger against the earpiece. I looked at the dark camera lens, refusing to play his manipulative game. "I am a journalist, Vance," I said, my voice low and resolute. "I report the news. I do not manufacture Jerry Springer spectacles for your ratings board. I will not name her. The story is over." I pulled the earpiece out, severing the connection. I denied Okafor the family blood sport he had engineered. I took the power of the broadcast entirely back into my own hands. My victory was finally completely clean. 2 park security officers approached the set quietly. They did not drag Harper away violently. They simply asked her to step behind the barricades. Harper looked at the crowd. She saw the stunned respect on the faces of the audience directed entirely at me. She saw the absolute absence of sympathy for her fabricated victimhood. She had been seen, truly seen, and the exposure broke her. She turned and walked away, led quietly off the set, not by my cruelty, but by the crushing weight of the consequences she had built for herself. The red tally light blinked back on, and I resumed the broadcast, ready to deliver the news. The digital trap Marcus and I constructed detonated silently behind the scenes precisely as Harper walked away from the broadcast set. We did not need to hurl insults or engage in a messy public feud to secure our retribution. We simply allowed the rigorous mechanics of the federal justice system to process the evidence Preston had so arrogantly provided. At 10 o'clock that morning, an armored tactical unit from the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division arrived at the downtown offices of Preston Talent Agency. The raid was executed with swift clinical efficiency. Agents flooded the lobby, seizing desktop computers, pulling physical ledgers from filing cabinets, and boxing up the encrypted hard drives that held the undeniable proof of his extortion attempts and massive bank fraud. Preston was dragged out of his glass corner office in heavy steel handcuffs. The smug, contemptuous smile he wore during our intercom confrontation was completely gone, replaced by the pale, terrified realization that his fraudulent empire was crumbling around him. The employees he had manipulated for years watched in stunned silence as federal authorities marched him into a waiting transport vehicle. Simultaneously, the Internal Revenue Service mobilized against the assets purchased with the stolen equity. Agents arrived at the leased Buckhead townhome Harper and Preston occupied. Because the luxury vehicles, the designer wardrobes, and the high-end camera equipment used to manufacture Harper influencer lifestyle were funded by the proceeds of federal wire fraud, they were subject to immediate asset forfeiture. The agents systematically stripped her life bare. They towed the leased sport utility vehicles from the driveway. They froze the remaining balances in her bank accounts. The glittering superficial glamour Harper had weaponized against me evaporated entirely in a single afternoon, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the crushing reality of impending legal defense fees she could no longer afford. The consequences landed exactly where they belonged, in the hands of the law, not mine. I did not gloat over the police reports. I did not watch the local news coverage of the raid. The true resolution required a final confrontation, one that would sever the remaining toxic threads of my childhood without turning me into the villain I had fought so hard to defeat. 2 days later, Marcus arranged a mandatory legal meeting. We did not convene at the sprawling Buckhead estate or in a luxurious executive suite. We gathered in a plain, windowless conference room at Marcus' downtown law firm. The austere setting offered no distractions and no room for performative social maneuvering. Richard, Evelyn, and Harper sat together on one side of the long mahogany table. They looked entirely broken. The arrogant, wealthy facade my parents had maintained for decades was visibly fractured by the stress of the looming federal investigation. Harper sat huddled in an oversized sweater stripped of her designer armor, her eyes red and swollen. They stared at me across the polished wood, expecting me to deliver the killing blow. They anticipated a furious, gloating monologue. They expected me to announce the foreclosure of their estate, to exile them permanently, and to relish in their absolute destruction. They expected the invisible sister to finally unleash 34 years of accumulated bitterness. I sat beside Marcus, my hands resting calmly on the table. I did not feel the urge to crush them. I looked at the terrified family sitting across from me, and I felt a profound, quiet clarity. I slid a thin manila folder across the mahogany table toward my father. Richard flinched, as if the paper might burn him. He reached out with a trembling hand and opened the cover. "You are not losing the house, Dad," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of malice. Richard stared at the documents, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He looked up at me, then at Marcus, struggling to comprehend the legal jargon. "Preston forged your signature to secure the secondary mortgage," Marcus explained, adopting his precise clinical attorney cadence. "Because the lien was executed through documented identity theft and wire fraud, it is legally voidable." I spent the last 48 hours working directly with the federal prosecutors and the primary lending institution. We provided the necessary digital evidence, proving you and Evelyn were the victims of this fraud, not co-conspirators. The bank is nullifying the mortgage. Your estate is secure. Evelyn let out a sharp, breathless gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. Tears streamed down her face. She looked at me expecting a list of demands, expecting me to hold this rescue over their heads as a weapon of eternal leverage. I am not doing this to buy your affection, Mom, I stated, answering her unspoken question. And I am certainly not doing it to excuse the fact that you enabled Harper cruelty for my entire life. I am doing it because I refuse to be the kind of person who takes a home from victims of financial fraud. I will not punish you for Preston crimes. I am asking you for absolutely nothing in return. I turned my attention away from my stunned parents and looked directly at my sister. Harper shrank back into her chair, unable to meet my gaze. The bravado she displayed at the sweet tea station had completely dissolved. "Harper," I said, my tone softening slightly, but retaining its firm boundary. "Look at me." She slowly lifted her head, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "You told me I was too ugly for television." I reminded her, speaking the words without anger, handing them back to her, not as an insult, but as a simple historical fact. "You told me to stay in the background because you were the pretty one." Harper opened her mouth, a desperate apology forming on her lips, but I raised a hand to stop her. "I believed you." I confessed, allowing the truth of my own insecurity to breathe in the sterile room. We both believed the exact same lie. We both believed that a face was the only currency that mattered. But a face was never going to save you, Harper, and it was never going to disqualify me. The words settled over the conference table, dismantling the toxic hierarchy our family had worshipped for 3 decades. The lie was finally completely dead. "I am not disowning you," I continued, sweeping my gaze across all 3 of them. "I am not demanding you never contact me again. But the dynamic we operated under is finished. Moving forward, we require space. We require honesty, and we require accountability. If you cannot provide those things, the door will close. But for now, I am leaving it open a crack. The choice of whether you walk through it is entirely yours." I did not wait for their tearful apologies or their promises to change. I stood up from the leather chair, picking up my briefcase. Marcus stood beside me, a silent anchor of support. We walked out of the plain conference room, leaving them to sit with the reality of their own actions. As I stepped into the bright, bustling hallway of the law firm, I did not feel a rush of cold, triumphant vengeance. I felt incredibly light. The crushing weight of the invisible armor I had worn since I was 8 years old was completely gone. The burden of proving my worth to people who refused to see it had evaporated. I walked toward the elevators unburdened and finally unconditionally free. Looking back at the long journey from that humid patio in Buckhead to the brightly lit anchor chair, I realized the greatest battle was never truly against my sister or my parents. The real war was waged inside my own mind, fighting against a narrative I had been fed since childhood. Surviving a toxic family dynamic requires much more than just physically escaping their orbit. It requires a fundamental rewiring of how you perceive your own inherent value. If my experience can offer any clarity to those navigating their own quiet battles, I want to share 5 profound truths I learned along the way. First, the people who demand you stay in the background are usually the ones most terrified of what you can accomplish in the light. They actively feed on your insecurity to maintain their own fragile status. My family needed me to be the invisible, flawed sister so they could avoid looking at their own profound emptiness. Your worth is never defined by those who profit from your self-doubt. Second, substantive competence is the ultimate unbreakable shield. A manufactured aesthetic and a loud voice might command a room for a fleeting moment, but deep, relentless intellect sustains an empire. I spent a decade honing my craft in the shadows, building a foundation of hard, undeniable skills. When the teleprompter failed and the superficial charm shattered my competence, was the only currency that actually mattered. Third, real justice is quiet, surgical, and devoid of spite. It does not require screaming matches or shattered glass on a marble hearth. When you are deeply wronged, the impulse to inflict equal pain is a heavy temptation. But utilizing restraint and letting the law handle the final consequences preserves your integrity while methodically dismantling their fraud. You do not have to become a monster to defeat one. Fourth, forgiveness does not mandate access. You can spare your relatives from ruin without inviting them back to your dining table. Protecting my parents from a fraudulent mortgage was an act of basic humanity, but it did not erase decades of enabling behavior. Setting an ironclad boundary is a vital act of self-preservation, not an act of cruelty. You dictate the terms of your own peace. Finally, the most devastating form of retribution is simply refusing to believe the toxic lies you were raised to accept. For 34 years, I allowed a single cruel narrative to dictate my wardrobe, my career choices, and my self-esteem. The moment I looked into the camera lens and recognized my own undeniable power, their entire hold over me disintegrated. Thriving without their validation is the ultimate victory. We all have shadows we were taught to hide within, and we all face people who desperately want to keep us there. Have you ever had to break a cycle of family toxicity and step into a light you were told you did not deserve? Share your own stories of reclaiming your narrative in the comments below. If you found strength in this journey, hit the like button and subscribe to Front Porch Revenge for more stories of surviving, thriving, and outsmarting the people who underestimated you. Do not ever let anyone convince you to shrink your life to make them comfortable. Take your seat at the table and let them watch you lead.